This is the Moonlight Graham Show, a freewheeling conversation with the role players, the underdogs, and guys with flat-out great stories in sports.
Hello and welcome back to the Moonlight Graham Show, where we celebrate the role players and the underdogs in sports. And our Moonlighter for today is a guy by the name of Brooks McKowen. Brooks McKowen is the all-time leading scorer in Iowa high school basketball with, get this, 2,831 points. He scored 2,831 points in a 4-year high school basketball career. He's also got the state record for most points in a season. His senior year in high school, he scored over 1,000 points, scoring 1,002 total points as a senior. Brooks McKowen scored more points as a senior than I did, I think, in my entire basketball career. Actually, I don't think. I know that for a fact. And he scored more than 2,000 more points than me than I did in my entire 4-year high school basketball career. Pretty incredible. Brooks went on to basically be a 4-year starter at point guard for the University of Northern Iowa. He was 6'2", about 180 pounds in high school, got up to be about 6'2", 195 while at UNI. And he went from a guy that averaged 35 points, 11 rebounds a game as a senior in high school to being basically your prototypical point guard where he distributed the rock, ran the offense at UNI, but started a ton of games, basically over 100 games as a starting point guard in his 4 years at UNI. During his time playing for both Greg McDermott and Ben Jacobson at UNI, the UNI team had 3 21 seasons. They went to 3 NCAA tournaments. So it was a really successful time for UNI basketball. And one of the reasons I wanted to have Brooks here on the podcast is not only is he a legendary Iowa high school basketball player, but he is the guy that I think of when I think about a guy that is one player in high school, averaging 35 and 11, and then a totally different player in college basketball. And he has to take on a totally different role and be a totally different type of player. To me, that's screams leader and that screams role player, a guy that's willing to take on a different role. And so I always admired Brooks McKowen for doing that. Today, after Brooks's playing career got over, he's also the son of a legendary coach. So it's no surprise that Brooks got right into coaching after his playing career wrapped up. And he's currently the head basketball coach at Upper Iowa University, the only Division II university in the state of Iowa. And just last year, Upper Iowa had their best year ever as a basketball program. They went 26-6, 18-4 in the conference with Brooks McKowen at the head of that team. And it's really awesome to see a guy come out of the state of Iowa that stayed in the state of Iowa and is leading the Upper Iowa program in a great direction. So this was a really fun interview. Brooks is just a year older than I was, so I remember him really well. Awesome high school basketball player. Awesome coach, great guy. Special thank you, of course, to our title sponsor here on the Moonlight Graham Show, which is the People's Company. Check them out at peoplescompany.com, especially Matt Adams and Andrew Zelmer. Those guys are just two beautiful dudes, great looking guys. Check them out online. Give them a call if you're looking to sell a farm or you're looking to buy a farm. They're the best in the business. Enjoy today's episode with Moonlighter, Brooks McKowen. Moonlighters, are you or someone you know moving down to Kansas City? Well, if you are, the one realtor that we trust and yet you need to be calling is the great Brian Samvig. As you well know, Brian Samvig is our producer here on the podcast, and there is not a better residential real estate advisor down in the Kansas City marketplace than Brian Samvig. Call Brian Samvig, shoot him a text. Hey, DM us on social media. We'll get you connected with Brian if you can't find him on all the socials, but he is there and he is active, and he is your Kansas City realtor, so give him a call. Brooks McKowen, head basketball coach at Upper Iowa University. Brooks, thanks for joining the Moonlight Graham Show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
You know, you are coming off a record-setting year up at Upper Iowa for the Peacocks, most wins in school history. What was it like just really getting the ball rolling at Upper Iowa last year?
It was fun. It was kind of the end to a building progress for that group. We've been to an NCAA tournament before and performed at an NCAA tournament. The team we had this year, we had a lot of guys that were in their, third, fourth, fifth, even sixth year of college basketball. And we've been so close the last 3 years before this year. We finished second a bunch of years in our league, just missed the NCAA tournament the last 2 years. And then this year we finally got over that hump and kind of made a run at it and made a run at the NCAA tournament with just a great group of guys. They were just a fun group to be around. They're hardworking. It was just a fun year all around.
So you mentioned it. You had some guys in their fifth year, maybe some guys in their sixth year. How do you handle that as a coach when you have like this backlog of guys on the roster, even though it's great last year? Now, all of a sudden, you've been recruiting for the last 3 years and you're building guys up. Like, how do you deal with that roster management with what COVID's done to you?
Yeah, it's definitely different. It's changed the recruiting landscape a little bit. Fortunately for us, we haven't really been hit by the transfer portal. We've got some pretty high character kids and pretty loyal guys. They've all stuck around. Dries Williams was in his 6th year of college basketball. He redshirted as a freshman and then got the COVID red shirt. Joe Schmolt was in his 5th year and played all 5 years for us. And, those 2 guys could have went and played anywhere. And I don't know how high of D1, but they definitely could have played, in the Valley or something like that. They were just unbelievably talented individuals and had worked their way up to that. They didn't necessarily come in like that. Joe was Mr. Basketball in the state of Iowa. But Reese kind of was basically a walk-on for us and then ended up as an all-region guy, which is crazy. But you definitely have to manage the roster. There's guys that were on the roster this year that in most years would have played. And they just didn't get that opportunity this year because of how old we were and some of the guys coming back when they weren't expected to come back. But again, lucky for us, just high character kids. They were all bought in. They worked every day. We legit had 12 to 15 guys that could have stepped on the court, which made practices unbelievably competitive. But luckily for us, it never got ugly. They didn't really fight about it. They got after each other and talked smack, but then afterwards they were hanging out and buddy again. So it was great.
How do you deal with like the ninth guy, right? The guy that might just be out of the rotation that, this might have been his year, but then we got a couple of guys coming back. They're competing every day in practice. In a typical year, they're going to be maybe the 6th man or maybe they're the 5th starter. How do you keep that guy engaged? Because ultimately with a team, especially as small as basketball, one bad apple can really spoil the basket, right? And so you got to keep that guy engaged and keep his attitude good. What do you do as a coach to make sure that guy stays engaged?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a $1 million question right there. I don't know if I have the right answer for it. Again, fortunately for us, we had guys that were bought in that kind of understood it. Winning always helps. It seems to cure everything. If you're having a bad year, it probably goes a little different with that 9th, 10th, 11th guy. But those guys, luckily for us, showed up every day and worked hard. You have to have a couple conversations with them here and there because you never know, especially with the COVID era, a guy could have been out for a week or 2. So guys had to stay ready. We had multiple games where we were missing guys for injuries or sicknesses, and you just had to plug those other guys in. At Moorhead this year, we won on a buzzer beater, and 2 guys played in the first half that hadn't really played all year and played serious minutes for us in the first half, and it was the reason we won the game. Sam Allen, who was a 5th-year senior for us, and Jackson Foley both played some significant minutes, and if those guys don't stay ready and not engaged, we don't win that game. So it was big to keep those guys ready because you never know when you were going to need them.
So Brooks, going back to your high school career, you are the all-time leading scorer in Iowa high school basketball, scored over 2,800 points. How often is that brought up to you? Like, is that just the one fun fact that everybody's like, hey, you're that guy that scored all those points in high school, aren't you?
Well, most people don't remember me anymore. I'm getting old enough where I'm kind of younger people don't remember me. Any speaking engagement or anything like that or something like this, it gets brought up. And I guess the best answer for it is you just got to play for your dad so you have an ultimate green light.
Yeah, that's right. When you were growing up, like, were you one of those, 1,000 shots a day guys? Like, did your dad have you in the gym all the time, taking a certain number of shots per day?
He never forced it. That was one thing about him is he believed in multi-sports and playing everything. He didn't even play basketball in college. He was a football and baseball guy. but always kind of loved basketball and worked his way into the coaching part of it. So he never really forced it on us, but growing up a coach's kid, we were in the gym all the time. I can remember in elementary riding the bus because our high school's at Wapsie Valley is in the middle of cornfields out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. We would jump on the bus after school and ride on the bus all the way out so we could sit at dad's practice. So we just kind of grew up in it and were around the game a lot. And then once I got to junior high, as kind of when I really had the dream of being a college basketball player and trying to be the best player I could be. And then he, kind of explained, well, if you're going to do this, you're going to have to outwork everybody and put the time in. And so that's when it kind of started for me with the 1,000 shots a day or whatever it may be.
When did the scoring record make it on your radar? Like, was it one of those things where in 8th grade, you put Kerry Cohorn's number up on the wall and you're like, that's my goal? Or
I heard him speak at a Snow Valley basketball camp when I was young, when I was like in junior high. And I remember like thinking like, dang, that's a lot of points. That'd be kind of sweet. But it never really like clicked and never even thought about it until after my junior year. And people started talking about it, about chasing the record. And honestly, back then, social media wasn't crazy like it is today. We didn't really have social media. So I'm sure it would have been a little more out of hand. But to me, I just showed up and played basketball. I didn't know how many points I was away from it or how much I needed here and there. I just wanted to go win a state title and to make my team the best we could be. And the scoring kind of just came with it.
I felt like Jake Hilmer was kind of like the modern Brooks McKowen a little bit. How much when you're recruiting Jake Hilmer, who I really like that kid, we've had him on the podcast too. I love the dual sport side of him, but how much of like, hey man, I kind of understand who you are from what you had to experience in high school. Did that play into when you were recruiting him to Upper Iowa?
It does. And it does with, multiple small town kids. That kind of that stigma of being from a small town and playing, 1A, 2A basketball where you're not going to be ready for college. I always spin that on them. Like, it doesn't matter what level you play in high school. If you've got the talent, you're going to be able to play at this level and to play college basketball. So I kind of did spin that part on it. And then and a little more today, AAU basketball, it doesn't matter if you're a small town, big town kid, you're going to match up against the best at some point. But we did, Jake's an awesome guy. We love him too. And he's had a great career for us. And he's been fun to coach. His dad's obviously a legendary basketball coach as well. So it's been fun to get to know that family. And now we got Austin coming next year. So we're excited to have a dual Hilmer out there here and there. Yeah,
that's cool. When you're growing up, who are the role models, whether in the state of the Iowa or guys you modeled your game off of when you were just a kid watching the game, putting up shots every day?
Well, obviously Michael Jordan was big back when I was there. I could never do anything like he did, but, grew up watching guys like him and, the Bulls era with Scottie Pippen and Steve Kerr. And, Dean Oliver was one of the names I can remember when he was in high school going to watch him play and just watching how easy the game looked to him. That was one of the guys I kind of just followed as the high school type kid. But, I was kind of a basketball fan. Just growing up, obviously basketball was playing in our house all the time. So just watching the game, I was never had like a favorite college team necessarily. I always just kind of watched them all. Duke was a little bit, but I wasn't like a diehard Iowa or Iowa State fan like everybody else in the state of Iowa. I was just a basketball fan and enjoyed watching good basketball.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm surprised that you weren't. Well, I guess, being where, Fairbank, Iowa is and Wapsie Valley, it's kind of northern Iowa country up there. And maybe before your time, there wasn't that much to cheer for, in that UNI time, right? Like in the 90s, there wasn't like a lot of great basketball in Cedar Falls.
Yeah, there wasn't. And they were kind of going through that transition, I think, when I was younger from D2 to D1. And then they made their run with Coach Mack when he made the NCAA tournament the first time. And then when we got there, even when I got to UNI, it was kind of funny. We talk about it a lot with my buddies, but you'd go into like a Shields or something, and there wouldn't even be a UNI gear for sale in there. It was just Iowa and Iowa State, and it drove me nuts. Now you walk into those places and there's purple everywhere, which is fantastic. But back then there wasn't many diehard Panther fans.
People have no idea what the UNI athletic department was like back in the, back when you and I were in school, like some of the stories that like probably Steve Nurse could tell as the equipment guy, just back in the day. It's just like, there's so many high schools in the state with better facilities and budgets than some of the stuff that you and I experienced 20 years ago.
Correct. It was a long walk from that basketball court up to the locker room in the dome, man. I was tired running up there at halftime. I tell you what.
That's right. Yeah. You played for some, great coaches though. Like you played for your old man, you played for Greg McDermott, you played for Ben Jacobson. Like all three of those guys are legendary coaches and they're old, right? Give me one thing you learned from each one of those three guys now that you are a coach yourself.
Yeah, I think one of the things I learned from my dad first is, and I'm still learning from him today, the dude, he is so passionate about the game of basketball and coaching, but is being able to adapt, just being able to adjust and adapt your system to your players. Being a high school coach, you don't always get to pick your players. You've got different guys coming in every year and with different talents. You could have bigs one year, guards another. So you got to be able to adjust. And I think that's being at Upper Iowa. We try to go get the best players we can get. Now we want them to fit our system a little bit. We're going to run similar stuff, but we have to be able to adjust every year. And that's one thing that I learned from him. Coach Mack, the man of sets, I guess would be, I've got about 1,000 sets in a playbook from him back in the day. Drives me crazy watching him at Creighton, letting those guys run and gun because he never let us do that, even though we asked a lot. But we won. He found a way to win and just to manipulate the game. And then his defensive schemes, we would adjust every game on defense of how we guarded people. Now we played the pack, but we guarded guys different. We backed off guys. Being able to adjust your defense with little tweaks would be something I really learned from him. And then Jake, just being a player's coach. I think he's one of the best player coaches out there where, you watch AJ Green. AJ Green's one of the all-time best to go through UNI. He took some tough shots. And that's not easy as a coach to let guys do that sometimes. But I think that's one thing I learned from Jake as a player, and then with coaching with him and sitting in those meetings and talking about players and is to kind of let their guys come into their own and to coach them to have extreme confidence, I guess would be the way of saying it. Now, you don't want a ton of bad shots. I'm not saying you can just let your guys chuck it all over the place. Like, guys got to earn their right to take some of those shots, but having how you have those conversations with them and how you work with them to get them for when they step on that court, they're not thinking about it and they're just playing.
It's funny you bring up, McDermott's kind of style when he was at UNI, and it seemed like he goes to Iowa State and it opened up a little bit, but not much. And then all of a sudden he gets to Creighton with Doug, and all of a sudden the offense, and maybe Doug opened it up for Greg. Maybe that, Doug was the piece that he needed. But it's amazing because I remember watching you at UNI and then playing against you in high school and being like, man, that's a totally different player and total style. Like you were run and gun, you kind of ran the offense. The ball was always in your hands. You shot it, you passed it, you rebounded it. And then at UNI, you were much more of, I'd say, more of a traditional point guard type of role. How difficult was that transition for you just in like less than a year's time to go from scoring 1,000 points your senior year of high school to, I don't think you scored more than that in your entire career at UNI.
I don't think so. No, I did not. It was tough right away. But the one thing, that I wanted to do was win. And I would do anything to win, whether that be score 30 in a night or to have 8 assists in a night. I did what I had to do to win. I'm not saying it was always easy to do, but for us to be successful at UNI, I needed to be a point guard that ran the team. We were running 2 to 3 sets a time down the court sometimes in our system. So being able to get guys in the right spot and be a leader in that sense. And, I also played with some pretty talented guys when I was there as well. Benny Jake, the player, could flat out score it and shoot it. Crawford was one of the more dynamic guys you ever been around. And then you've got your Colemans and Stouts and Schneidermans and Grubers. I could go on and on with some of those guys. But our system played through them. And the other side of it is, you go play for a post. Coach Mack was a post. He wanted to pound that thing in. I should have known that going into it, I guess. But no, we were we had a lot of success, played in 3 NCAA tournaments, and just had a blast winning with those guys and being around that type of team. I learned a ton, and I'm a better coach today because of it, I think. But like you said, it wasn't always the easiest, but I knew it was the best thing to do to help our team win.
How'd you deal with like the self-confidence part of it? When you're trying to adapt your game on the fly, like, it's not like you sat and learned behind somebody for half a season. You got thrown into the fire and you just were expected to be a different type of player from day one. That's not easy, especially for 18, 19-year-old kid. And then obviously there's times in college where you struggle more than you do in high school, because all of a sudden the game's quicker, the athletes are better, all the competition's better, all that stuff. How did you deal with like that self-confidence stuff while still having to play basketball and lead a team?
Yeah, it's you lean on your teammates. I had some good friends in college, good family. Lean on my dad and brother and mom, and just when times are tough, you kind of sit down and talk with them. And so, luckily for me, I had a good support system that I could sit down and talk with. One of the great coaches we had when I was there, Coach Rudder, was awesome, and he was one of those guys I could lean on. I think every player has an assistant or somebody that they can kind of go to and talk to, and is kind of their guy. And he ended up being kind of mine. I think he knew when I was struggling sometimes or would see me frustrated. And he was the one that would kind of grab me and pull me to the side and make sure that I knew I could still play or whatever it may be. So anytime you get in a rut, you got to have a good support system. It's people you can talk to. You got to understand that when and I tell our guys that a lot, when you get to college, you're the best player in your high school. Well, so are the other 15 guys on this team. Most of these guys that play, are their best players in high school. Their roles are going to be different when they get there, and it's how can you adjust to that role and can you be the best you can be at that role? It's not always easy for guys, but just being there, having somebody you can lean on is kind of how I did it.
So one of the guys that gave me a lot of fits in high school was Jared Jostin, and I know you played a lot of games with Jared Jostin during your time at UNI. Give me a good Jared Jostin story.
Oh man, as you would know, he gave me fits every day in practice too. So athletic. And you just never knew what he was going to do. Like it seemed like he never made the normal play.
He elevated so quickly too.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I love Jared. I lived with him all 4 years of college. He was my freshman roommate in the dorm. So I got to know him very, very well, obviously. And, he had a great year his last year too, that 5th year of his, when a bunch of us ended up graduating and he kind of got some more minutes finally. And in this day of age, you don't see that guy sticking around 4 or 5 years without playing, but him and Veet, they kind of bought into that stuff, and you just never knew what he was going to do. And then when he did it, it was so explosive and so fast. More times than not, I was still standing in the spot he started from. So I did not like guarding him in practice. I'll say that.
Yeah, I know. He's one of those guys that you couldn't figure out how to guard. There was just, because as soon as you get in front of him, I'm 5'11", so he just jumps over me. Right? Yeah. It's like, wow, there's only so much I could do there.
And he was funny. Like if you would do traditional ball handling drills with that guy, he looked terrible. He looked like he just couldn't dribble at all to save his life. But then when you put him on the court with just one-on-one or whatever's, it's like it's on a string. So he's one of those guys you can't really teach much. You just let them do what they do.
When you're at Upper Iowa now, like we're talking a lot about, Iowa guys, small school guys like Jake and Austin Hilmer, maybe a Jared Jostin ends up at Upper Iowa, in this day and age, who knows? But what are you looking for when you're building out that roster, when you're out there recruiting?
High character kids. We're in Fayette, Iowa. If you've ever been to Fayette, it's not very big. You blink, you're going to miss it. The university is the only thing in the town. There's no high school or anything like that. So we're very, very unique. So we got to go out and get kids that are okay with getting a good education and playing basketball, because that's what they're doing here. Now they're college kids. They're going to have their fun, but it's together. It's together. They're not going out. We don't have clubs in the nightlife. So you got to pick the right type of kids here. I would say about 90% of our roster is Iowa kids. The 8 to 9 guys that played on a nightly basis this year were all Iowa kids. So being the only D2 in the state of Iowa, we have went hard after Iowa kids. You get those guys in here and they play with that Upper Iowa on their jersey, and they just have a different pride in it in the way they approach things. And then if you can find some good small town kids, it helps. They're used to living in small towns. They understand it. But you got to have good kids. You got to have high character kids. If they're screwing around and getting in trouble off the court, I find out about it within minutes. It's just the way the town works. It's a small town. So I don't want to deal with that stuff, and we can't bring in kids that are going to do it.
You mentioned earlier that you got 3 kids and a 4th on the way. As you're raising your kids, how youth sports today, they're not the same as they were back when we were kids. How do you handle, as a coach now, how do you handle getting your kids involved with sports, and kind of what's your plan for your kids?
Well, my oldest is 5, so we're 5, 4, 2, and 1 on the way in a couple weeks. So I haven't quite hit the youth sports yet. We just started T-ball, and that was interesting enough for me the way it is. But I would say as a coach, we're out there at CAAU a lot. It's tough. It's tough because there's a lot of benefits to the youth sports and the opportunities. I want my kids to have an opportunity to play multiple sports, though. I definitely don't want them to specialize at a young age. Mine probably aren't going to be over 5'10" either, so I don't even know if basketball is the route for them. I'm thinking about making a bunch of golfers and retiring as a caddy, so I don't know. We're still trying to figure it out, but they'll be involved with sports if they want to be. I think that's one thing I learned from my dad as well is to not kind of push you into the gym. And now they love it already. They're at our games. They get an opportunity to come to practices, be around our guys all the time. So they're going to be full in with my basketball teams and a part of it, which I think is good for my guys as well with the players, to have that family atmosphere and to be around a family like ours. And fortunately for us, our parents are great too. So they're all in here with it too. But that's a good question. I don't really know how to answer the youth sports. I've seen bad. I've seen good. I guess we'll have to figure it out as we go.
So how often did you play multiple sports? You've mentioned that a couple of times, but did you play all the sports all the way through high school? Or at some point did you say, hey, basketball is my ticket here, now I'm going to focus?
So I started to focus on basketball in junior high, but I played football all the way through and loved playing football. So I was a football, basketball guy all the way through. I ran track until I think my sophomore year was the last year I did that. And then AAU started to take over, and we still had to qualify at districts, and it was the same day as state AAU. So I knew it wasn't going to work out. So I had to back out of that. And then baseball, I played for a couple years as well in high school, and just, it wasn't fair to my teammates with me being gone all the time for AAU basketball. So I kind of had to back out, but if I could do it again, I think I would stick with the sports with all 4 of them. I kind of regret not playing them all the way through and being around your friends. I think it's great for you. I love multi-sport guys when they get here, and then they start to focus on the sport. It's fun to watch them progress. But I think you can learn a lot in every sport.
So, Brooks, last question I got for you here is, as 37-year-old Brooks, I'm guessing you're about 37 maybe.
Yep.
What advice would you give 17-year-old Brooks McKowen? 20 years ago, you're looking back and, your entire future is still out in front of you of your playing career, your coaching career. What's one piece maybe that nobody had given you at that point that you'd give yourself now?
Oh, that's a good one. Not to let any moment pass you by, whether that's on the court, off the court, but just to enjoy every moment and be in the moment. I felt like I worked pretty hard as a college basketball player in my career. I definitely wasn't the best athlete on the court, so I had to try to find a way to outsmart and outwork them. But I guess one thing I would probably say too, if it went towards my career, just as a player, is as to be a little bit more of a student of the game. I loved watching basketball, but I don't know if I followed it as well and picked up moves and stole styles. I kind of just did what I did and worked at what I do, but to be a little bit more of a student of the game.
That's not what I expected to hear from you. Being a coach's son, I would just assume, I guess I would describe you as a student of the game.
And I shouldn't say that, I guess. I like the basketball IQ of it and that part of it. I watch that stuff and plays and schemes, but like individual players and watching how they, like watching a Steph Curry and how he dribbles and does the step backs. And I didn't really have a lot of that in my game. I was pretty 1 to 2 moves, pretty simple, got to it, which is okay. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That might be how I would do it. But maybe to copy guys a little more and get out of my comfort zone a little more as a player. And then the same for coaching. Now I've tried to do that in coaching. I steal all the time. I don't claim to be the smartest guy in the world when I coach. I steal plays and schemes and stuff all the time. So I've changed as a coach. But that's kind of one thing I'd probably say as a player.
Yeah, you're right about the, I guess guys call it like getting in the lab nowadays. And you've seen it from like, Kobe. Now that we're learning more about how like Kobe built his game and other guys are following that motto where like the simple footwork stuff and how they catch the ball on the wing and how they get that first step or what they do on the block or what they do when a guy gets on the hip. Like that's just a granular level of offensive basketball that never occurred to me. And maybe that's kind of what you're getting at too. Is just the individual offensive moves are way more refined today than they were maybe 10 years ago.
Absolutely. And we've got more access to video and to trainings and that stuff online now where we didn't have that when we were playing. But that's exactly what I'm saying. Like just, being able to finish a different way at the rim. And like we do these different finishing series with our guys and, the different skills and footworks with our guys. And I wish I would have done more of that as a player, just having that different stuff. I was pretty fundamental, I guess would be the best way of putting it. But I wish I would have been able to do more of that and copy more. And like you said, Kobe kind of brought that up and changed the game and how people grow up and play. And I wish I would have had a little bit of that.
Okay, I guess last question I got for you. I'm assuming I don't remember you dunking, but you had to dunk, right? Or
I've got video. No one believes me, but I've got video.
Did you dunk at UNI?
I did not at UNI.
Never got one.
Never got one. Either I was too tired at the time or they were way too damn fast and caught up to me every time. So I never got a breakaway where I had a chance. Plus I knew if I missed that thing, which it was about a 50-50, I was going to be sitting on the bench probably for the rest of the night, maybe the next.
So are you one of those guys that like has to prove it to your wife every year at your birthday that you can still dunk?
She sees enough video. Yeah. We've got some, I had some in high school. I had
but
a couple
like, can you
school.
Still do it?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not.
No. Yeah.
No.
I mean, I've never dunked, so I'm not talking here, but like, I'm always curious to think of like, when was your last dunk?
When I was probably in college or a couple years after college. It had to be a good day for me to dunk most of the time. So, like I said, I was not the most athletic person in the world and I don't claim to be. So, I always just told people when they asked that 3's worth more than 2. So I'd rather launch it from behind the 3-point line.
Just the ultimate white guy response, right?
Exactly.
Well, Brooks, I really appreciate you making time for the podcast today, man. It's awesome to see you doing so well at Upper Iowa with a bunch of Iowa kids. So really cool to see you doing well. And thanks for joining the pod.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a blast.
Thank you for listening to today's episode with the greatest high school scorer in Iowa high school basketball history, Brooks McKowen. I alluded to it in the podcast that I played against Brooks at one point. Now, in my 4 years of high school basketball, Brooks and I overlapped for 3 years, but we never played each other in a regular season game. Now, both of us ended our career with a loss in the 2A state championship game, him in 2003 to Sioux Center. Essentially, that same Sioux Center team all came back in 2004. They couldn't get out of the semifinals in 2004 where they lost to PCM. Then we lost, the St. Edmund Gales lost to PCM in double overtime in that final game. Clearly, the Gales were the better team and just happened to lose that night. I'm only kidding, of course. But Brooks and I did square off in the summer of 2002, heading into what would have been my junior year and Brooks' senior year. Of course, Brooks isn't going to remember this because that guy played a lot of high-level basketball, and I was just the Johnny All-American type of guy that had a target on Brooks's back because he was a big deal. Everybody knew that he was going to be the Mr. Basketball winner that upcoming year. So when we played them in a summer team camp, I was like, I'm taking Brooks McKowen and I'm going to, go all out at this summer game. A guy like Brooks was probably like, who in the heck is this guy? But the Gales came out victorious. We ended up beating Wapsie Valley by about 10 points that day. I remember we played really well. And coming into that year, nobody cares about this but me. But hey, it's my podcast. The Gales should have made the state tournament in 2003, but I ended up tearing my ACL in football that fall. Our all-state center, Nicholas Sandvik, had mono for over half of the season. He didn't even play half of the games. Our first team all-conference 4 guy, Ryan Stonick, ended up breaking his ankle. And we had another starter actually quit the team a week into the season after everybody else was out. So he kind of bailed on the team after that first couple of weeks of the season. So at most of that year, we were essentially down 4 starters. We still almost made the state tournament, where we ended up losing in the sub-state final to Okoboji. We got down 13-0. Anyway, enough about the 2003 Gales team. We beat the one time I squared off with Brooks McKowen, I came out on top. Sorry, Brooks, I had to bring it up. But to be clear, Brooks McKowen was an absolute force in high school basketball, and he was a great player and a guy that I really, really remember watching a lot, because you don't see a lot of guys that play the point guard, average 35 a game, average 11 rebounds. The guy was just an absolute stud. And I said this in the intro, but it was awesome to see him go to UNI and take on a different role, a role that you could tell he wasn't totally comfortable with early on, but he grew into that role because he's an awesome teammate and he's an awesome basketball player. So that's my Brooks McKowen story. And I hope you're all rooting for Upper Iowa and the Peacocks, because he's got a really good thing going there. And of course, they got Jake Hilmer running the show at point guard, who is also a Moonlighter. Special thanks to the Moonlight Graham Show team, my brothers Andy and Neil. Of course, Tommy Griffin, who is our trusted co-host and also does all the write-ups on the pod. Brian Sambik, who's the best producer in the game. And the great Brendan Gargano, who does all of our artwork. Thank you guys for listening. You guys, the Moonlighters, are the best. Have a great week, guys.
It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. It's a pretty good program, broadcasting to the heartland. Sports stories for the everyman. It's Moonlight Graham, yeah. Please follow us on Instagram. You're loving us on Twitter too. You download every pod we do. It's Moonlight Graham.